Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to episode 121 of Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host. My name's Larry Erickson. And for the next about nearly half an hour, I'm going to be talking about things that I think are important, I think are worthy of your attention, and maybe even doing something about. Any comments, questions, reactions, whatever to the show can be sent to me directly. In fact, they should be. The email address is whoviating, WHOVIATING @AOL.com. And if you didn't catch that, you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and you can leave a comment there, or you can get the email address from there. As always, I ask that if you do send me email, you're a little patient about getting an answer, because I can be kind of slow about answering email. And please include something in the subject line like, Left Side of the Aisle, or your cable show, something like that, so I know it's not spam. All right, with those introductions, let's get to it. Now, I always like to start with good news when I can. I've got a couple of pieces of good news this week, so let's start with them. Now, the first one you've heard about. I know you have, so I can be relatively brief. I don't have to go into a lot of explanations and details about it. In a stinging and long overdue smackdown of New York City czar Michael Bloomberg and police commissar Ray Kelly, U.S. District Judge Shira Scheindlin has ruled that the city's stop-and-frisk program deliberately and unconstitutionally violated the rights of tens of thousands of New Yorkers. Quoting her, the city's highest officials have turned a blind eye to the evidence that officers are conducting stops in a racially discriminatory manner. She also said they willfully ignored overwhelming proof that the policy is racially discriminatory. Proof such as the fact that in 2011, 92% of those stopped were males, 87% of those stopped were black or Hispanic, nearly half of those stopped were young black or Hispanic men, even though they only account for 4.6% of the city's population. Even in Greenwich Village, which is overwhelmingly a white neighborhood, 70% of those stopped were black or Latino. Stop and frisk, or by its legal term, is actually a Terry stop. This is named from Terry v. Ohio. This is a 1968 Supreme Court decision that legitimized the practice. The point is, stop and frisk by itself is constitutional. But Scheindlin concluded that the plaintiffs in this case had, quoting her, readily established that the NYPD, New York Police Department, the NYPD implements its policies regarding stop and frisk in a manner that intentionally discriminates based on race, rather than the reasonable suspicion of criminal activity that is the actual requirement for a legal Terry stop. Now, some have tried to defend the policy. In a story in the wake of the decision, the National Journal rather selectively quoted an article from The Atlantic to argue that the policy was effective in reducing crime. It said that in 2011, 770 guns were recovered, that is, confiscated, during frisks, compared to only 594 in 2003, which is the year before the city implemented stop and frisk. But in 2011, there were 685,724 stops reported by the police, which means that a gun was confiscated in slightly over 0.1% of stops. It also means, now remember, we're talking about an additional 176 guns in 2011 as compared to 2003. Additional 176 guns. What that means is that in 2011, the police removed an extra gun from the streets in 1 out of every 3,900 stops. Which means that 99.975% of the time, the stop failed to take an additional gun off the street. And it's hard to imagine by what standard a failure rate of 99.975% constitutes working. And by the way, don't give me that the crime is down line that Mayor Blooming idiot keeps invoking as a one-size-all-fits excuse for violating people's rights. The fact is, crime has been dropping across the country in big cities for years. Both violent crime and serious property crime have been way down since their peaks in the early 1990s. Violent crime in the U.S. peaked in 1992 and has declined almost every single year since. The number of violent crimes in the United States is down by nearly 38% as compared to 1992. The rate of violent crime per capita, the difference is even more dramatic because fewer crimes and a bigger population. In 1992, the rate of violent crime was about 1 for every 132 residents. In 2011, it was 1 in every 259, a drop of nearly 50%. Now, Judge Steinland did not ban stop and frisk. She probably couldn't have in the face of the Terry decision, but she did order an independent monitor to oversee major changes, including areas of policies, training, supervision, monitoring, and discipline. She also ordered that some police are going to be wearing body cameras that actually will make a record of these face-to-face on-the-street encounters. No one, this is quoting the judge, no one should live in fear of being stopped whenever he leaves his home to go about the activities of daily life. Targeting young black and Hispanic men for stops based on the alleged criminal conduct of other young black or Hispanic men violates bedrock principles of equality. Absolutely. All right, my other bit of good news. In a rather startling reversal and an implicit admission that the decades-long so-called war on drugs is an abysmal failure, Attorney General Eric Holder has called for major changes to the nation's criminal justice system to scale back the use of harsh sentences for certain drug-related crimes, instead making greater use of drug treatment community service programs, including changing Justice Department policy such that what he called low-level nonviolent drug offenders would not be charged with crimes that carry minimum mandatory sentences. In fact, referring to those minimum mandatory sentences, Holder adopted language long used by critics of the practice. He said these sentences, quoting him, breed disrespect for the system. When applied indiscriminately, they do not serve public safety, they have had a disabling effect on communities, and they are ultimately counterproductive, which is exactly what the critics have been saying the entire time. Now, unfortunately, there was no immediate indication that this means the feds are going to stop their raids and their attacks on medical marijuana clinics. And in fact, Holder completely avoided that subject. In fact, he avoided marijuana entirely in his talk. But even so, I can't help but wonder if the fact that 20 states and the District of Columbia now have legal medical marijuana laws and 3 more states are considering it, I wonder if this actually helped to force Holder's hand on these low-level nonviolent users. This is especially true since support for medical pot just went mainstream in a big way. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN's chief medical correspondent, says he has been wrong to ignore marijuana's medical potential and has changed his mind. He was speaking of the potential benefits of the drug and aiding people suffering with a number of acute medical conditions, including seizures, cancer, multiple sclerosis, and HIV. And Gupta said, quoting him, "We have been terribly and systematically misled for nearly 70 years in the United States, and I apologize for my own role in that." One of the things he said he changed his mind about this was discovering that back in 1970, the Assistant Secretary of Health wrote that marijuana should be classified as a Schedule I substance. This means the substances with the highest potential for abuse. He's saying that marijuana was even a higher potential for abuse than cocaine. But they discovered that this secretary said that not because the government had evidence of abuse, but specifically because it did not have evidence of abuse. The decision was avowedly driven by ignorance, not by knowledge. And in fact, that's been the story of marijuana in general and medical marijuana in particular in this country for ever since the days of Harry Anslinger. And if you don't know who that was, look him up. And while you're at it, look up the movie Reefer Madness. And it looks like now that maybe, possibly, we just might be starting to recover from that 70 years of lies and ignorance. And that, again, would be good news. All right, from there, we go to one of our regular weekly features, the Clown Award, given for meritorious stupidity. This week, the big red nose goes to U.S. Representative Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma. At a town hall last week, Mullin said he would like to, quote, do away with, unquote, many programs to help low-income folks because, he said, it just allows them to be lazy. How does he know this? Because, he said, he personally witnessed fraud in the food stamp program. I'm quoting him here. So I'm buying my groceries and I noticed everybody was giving that card, by which I assume he means the EBT card, the electronic benefit transfer card. There's a couple beside me. The guy was built like a brick house. He had muscles all over him. And she was all in shape and looked like she'd just come from a fitness program. She was in spandex and they were both physically fit. And they go up in front of me and they pay with that card. Fraud. Absolute 100%, all of it is fraud. It's all over the place. And on that level of evidence, he saw a physically fit couple using food stamps. He concludes that 100% of it is fraud and the whole thing should be brought crashing down. Now that itself would be enough to win him this week's award, but there was more, in that he is as appallingly ignorant of fact as he is of logic. I mean, first consider the fact that he knows nothing about this couple except they were fit. Maybe they just recently lost their jobs. Maybe just recently lost all their income. Maybe they're brand new to the program. Maybe they work out at home in order to stay fit. He doesn't know any of that, but to him that's impossible. This was fraud. Well, according to the Department of Agriculture, which runs the food stamp program, nearly half of participants were less than the age of 18, nearly 9% were over the age of 60. In terms of income, it's the poor who get this. Only about 17% of SNAP, now SNAP is Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. This is actually the official name of the food stamp program now. Only about 17% of SNAP households had gross incomes above the poverty line. 43% of SNAP households had incomes at or below half of the poverty line. 20% of these households had no cash income at all. Despite that, only 8% of SNAP households received temporary assistance for needy families, and another 4% received state general assistance benefits, so only 12% of SNAP households got what we used to call welfare. Income support came mostly from Social Security. 22% of SNAP households got Social Security, and another 20% got SSI, Supplemental Security Income benefits, which go to the elderly and the disabled. Something else for you, by the way. The average size of a household receiving food stamps is 2.1 people. That is smaller than the average American family, which is 2.55 per household. So why, in the face of all that, in the face of all that fact, do clowns like Representative Melonhead keep screeching fraud, even as the actual level of fraud in the program is about 1%, which is actually far less than many other programs, both public and private? I'll give you two reasons. One, the program is efficient. About 95% of SNAP benefits go directly to people to help them buy food. Only about 5% goes to administrative costs. And two, it works. When SNAP benefits are added to gross income, 13% of SNAP households are lifted above the poverty line. For those who are the poorest, making no more than half of the poverty line, it's even a little better. About 15% of those are lifted above that midpoint. The fact is, SNAP works. It reduces poverty, it reduces hunger, it reduces malnutrition. It works. And the jackasses with their Jeremiads and the bozos with their bleedings can't stand, they utterly hate the idea that any government program to help the poor clearly, undeniably does exactly that. And they are more than willing to let millions of people go hungry rather than to admit their moral and intellectual failure. U.S. Representative Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma. Clown. We're taking a break. And we're back. Back just in time for our other regular weekly feature, the Outrage of the Week. Now, when I wrote about this one, nobody was talking about it, but now apparently you may have heard about it. It's kind of gone a little bit viral, but it's worth talking about anyway. Jaleesa Martin of Newport, Tennessee, couldn't agree with the father of her 7-month-old boy on the child's last name. They obviously weren't married, but they were trying to agree on the last name. They couldn't agree, so they wound up at Cook County Chancery Court before Child Support Magistrate Luann Ballou. Now, the judge did resolve that issue, but that wasn't enough for her. No, no, no. She didn't like the child's first name. So she ordered that the parents change that too, change it on the birth certificate, even though the parents had agreed on that name and didn't want it changed. All right, now first, know this. The name in question was not something truly bizarre like Mr. Mixyezpitlek or an unpronounceable symbol representing the artist formerly known as Prince, which, by the way, something even he gave up on eventually. Know that, okay? Knowing that, it seems to me the decision in and of itself, that kind of arrogant overreach, could be cause for outrage. I mean, a number of countries around the world have standards, have lists of approved names or restrictions on names. The U.S. is not among those countries. But that's not enough. That outrage is not enough for the lofty standards of the Outrage of the Week. Oh, no, no. The real outrage here is the reason the judge gave for demanding that change. You see, the child's name is Messiah. The judge demanded it be Martin. Now, according to the Social Security Administration, they maintain an annual list of the top 1,000 baby names. And from that list, on the list of names with the fastest growth in popularity, Messiah came in 4th. Between 2011 and 2012, the name Messiah jumped 246 positions on this list, from number 633 to number 387. Messiah in 2012 was a more popular name for male babies than obviously a lot of other names, but some of the names that was more popular then were Ari, Bruce, Chris, Damon, Gary, Jay, Jonas, Lawrence, Malcolm, Marvin, Ramon, and Rory. But none of that doesn't matter. Popularity, none of that matters. Not according to Luann Ballou, which, speaking of names, I have to say reminds me of a combination of a cartoon character and something J.K. Rowling would make up. But the child, she declared, could not be named Messiah because, quoting exactly what she told local news, the word Messiah is a title, and it's a title that has only been earned by one person, and that person is Jesus Christ. That is, Judge, and I deliberately put the words in quotation marks, Judge Ballou has decided that her religious beliefs, her religion, override all other considerations. Tradition doesn't matter, the law doesn't matter, the Constitution doesn't matter, separation of church and state doesn't matter. Her church overrides it all. Now, that very concept is dangerous. Luann Ballou, in fact, is not competent to be in her position as a judge, and the fact that she is in that position is an outrage. By the way, there's 2 footnotes to this. Jaleesa Martin, the boy's mother, said she will appeal the decision. Good on her. And the ACLU of Tennessee has said they will help her with this appeal. Good on them. And in the comments on the story, at the website of a TV station in Knoxville, Tennessee, which originally reported on the story, comments at their website, folks there overwhelmingly condemned the judge. There is hope for us yet. All right, I've got a couple of updates on previous stories, one of which is good news, one of which isn't. Back in June, I told you about 5-year-old Jaden Sink. She set up a Pink Lemonade for Peace stand in front of the Equality House. This is the rainbow-colored house that stands directly across the street from the compound of the lunatic Westboro Baptist Church. Well, it turns out her lemonade stand has become a national event. On Saturday, August 10th, she set up her last lemonade stand of the summer season, having raised to date nearly $24,000 for Planting Peace, which is the outfit that runs Equality House. But on that day, she wasn't alone. At least 56 other lemonade stands were set up the same day involving children as far away as England, raising money for Equality House. Those other stands raised another $1,000 plus, and in fact, it may be a fair amount more because it appears that a number of those people have not yet submitted a figure as to how much they brought in. In any event, all of that money is going to Equality House's anti-bullying efforts. Now, when I first reported on this, I called it feel-good news. But more than that, Jaden Sink is a hero. All right, the other update is it's feel-bad news. 2 weeks ago, I talked about how some states were moving at warp speed to impose new restrictions on voting and voters in the wake of the Supreme Court having gutted the Voting Rights Act, and how North Carolina was one of those states. Well, they've done it. North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory has signed into law a bill that not only requires certain types of photo identification at the polls in order to vote, identification, by the way, that the state itself admits that something around 300,000 registered voters in North Carolina don't have, many of those being, surprise, the poor and the minorities. Besides that, this bill also eliminates a boatload of other measures that were designed to protect against voter disenfranchisement or encourage voter participation. So in addition to the photo ID requirement, the bill also reduces early voting days from 17 to 10. It eliminates same-day registration. It ends pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. It ends a student civics program and kills an annual state-sponsored voter registration drive. It also requires the Board of Elections to look for ways to purge, quote-unquote, purge voter rolls. It eliminates the checkoff on tax returns for public funding of elections. It raises individual donation limits, which obviously are the most benefit to the most well-off. It expands the number of ways in which unlimited corporate contributions can be used by political parties. It broadens those who can challenge somebody else's right to vote from someone in the same county to someone anywhere in the same state. It drops a requirement that political ads paid for by political parties and so-called independent groups actually state in the ad who paid for it. And it allows these so-called dark money groups to not report on how much they spend on campaign-style ads except for the period after September 15th during an election year. In short, it is a voter suppression and money rules wet dream. Now, the wingnuts are right about one thing here. A lot of states don't have same-day registration, or they have less early voting than North Carolina had, or some such thing. But rather than saying, as you would foolishly, rationally expect, rather than saying, look how much better North Carolina does on encouraging voting than other states, the response from Governor McCrazy was, this new law brings our state into line with a healthy majority of other states. Which reminds me of nothing so much as the statement I heard from a corporation a number of years ago that said it was, quote, meeting the competition, unquote, by raising its prices to the same level as theirs. But the claimed excuse for all this, as always, is to combat voter fraud, the mythological supposed crisis that was manufactured entirely in the PR firms of the right wing. Consider this. In 2012, in North Carolina, there were 6,947,317 ballots cast in the general and primary elections. Of those, the State Board of Elections said 121 alleged cases of voter fraud were referred to the appropriate district attorney's office. So alleged, not even proven, alleged voter fraud accounted for 0.00174% of the ballot, less than 0.02% In 2010, 3.79 million ballots were cast. Only 28 cases of voter fraud were referred, of alleged voter fraud. So in 2010, alleged voter fraud accounted for 0.000738%, 0.7 of 1% of the votes. Meanwhile, with 300,000 people in North Carolina, registered voters who lack the photo ID, that means that even if 99.9999, that's 4 nines, 99.9999% of those people got photo IDs, there would still be more people disenfranchised by lack of ID than there were alleged cases of voter fraud in 2010. Oh, but that doesn't matter. No, 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 no. This is all about protecting the integrity of the system. It's just common sense. So much so that Governor McCrazy used the phrase common sense twice in a 90-second YouTube video he put up about signing the bill. And by the way, in that same 90 seconds, he also found time to claim that the only opposition to photo ID comes from the extreme left, only interested in divisive politics. An argument that once again proves the right wing has absolutely no sense of irony. But face facts, and this is important, this is all of a piece. It's not just North Carolina. That's just the latest case. It's part of a program. There is an active movement. There is an active coordinated effort by the right wing to make it harder, impossible if they can work it out, to make it harder for anybody who would not reliably vote for the wingnuts to vote at all. Which is why, virtually without exception, the changes we are seeing getting pushed affect primarily the poor, the minorities, and the young. And I'm not talking about some dark conspiracy by dark forces. This is all out in the open. It's coordinated by ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. This is a corporate-funded entity that develops model laws friendly to corporations under 1%, including on voter ID, and distributes them to a like-minded network of state-level legislators and contacts. And if you're in a demographic that they cannot count on to reliably vote in their favor, they are after your vote. Not just in North Carolina, everywhere. Now, the upside, or more accurately, the not downside of this story, is that within hours of the bill being signed, the ACLU of North Carolina and a coalition of other groups filed a lawsuit against the bill, and the Justice Department has suggested it will fight the law. They're at least considering it, so at least that's a hopeful sign. Oh, by the way, there is a footnote to this. This law did do one thing right. It banned the use of these touchscreen voting machines. These things are unreliable and immensely hackable. So good riddance, at least in North Carolina. All right, last, very quickly, something about guns. Every week I've been giving you our weekly update about the people killed by guns in the United States. Well, as of August 13th, 7,167 people have been killed by guns in the United States since Newtown. That is more than 400 people more than the total of U.S. military deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. And by the way, the other thing is that as we get further and further along in here, the count gets distorted because 60% of gun deaths happen as a result of suicide. That is very rarely reported in the news. According to Center for Disease Control estimates, you could actually figure that as of this date, over 21,000 people have died from guns in the United States since Newtown. Have the best week you can. We'll see you next week.